I'm writing a memoir right now about the biggest case I worked on, which was a cold case murder. And a detective actually contacted me. Somebody had called the tip line and told them, "Oh, you got to talk to her." And I ended up going to the apartment complex where she lived. It was kind of one of those amazing things where it all fell into place. And I identified a man who, the way I described him, there had been someone on their list that matched that description. And there were some other things where he lived and the car he drove, just things that all fit into place. So based on what I told him, they went to this man's place of employment and talked to the boss or whatever and got a straw or something to get DNA off of.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Sherrie Dillard with us on the show today. Sherrie's a globally recognized psychic, medium, and medical intuitive with a passion for blending intuition, spirituality, and personal growth. The author of 11 books translated into 15 languages, she's also known for assisting police detectives in solving cold murder cases. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now, let's go talk with Sherrie. Sherrie, welcome to the show. I'm so thrilled that you could join us today. Thanks for making time for us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy I'm here.
Oh, my delight. Have you always been a psychic? Is everybody a psychic? Tell us about you, and then do you think everybody's a psychic?
Well, for me, I was very aware of, a lot of, I think it's funny that a lot of people are as children. And of course, I was one of those kids that was intuitive, aware. I was aware. I had a sister who had passed over um, like 10 months before I was born. And I remember, I just remember being very aware of her. And it would just seem normal that, I could feel her, I see her around me. And then I started giving professional readings since, gosh, I always say longer than I ever like to admit I'm old, but I've been doing it since I was, in my mid-20s and then went full time with it in my early 30s. So I've been doing sessions, readings, and for again, I'm not even gonna it's a long time I've been doing that. And yes, I think that everybody definitely has that gift if or just even ability, whatever you're feeling comfortable with that. I always tell people that it's like we can all sing, we can all sing. Although you don't want to hear me sing, but I can do it, but it's not great. It's not very good. And it's one of those things that some people just seem to be more naturally attuned to, develop faster, but, we can all develop it too. We can all work with it, and yeah, absolutely. I think it's just one of our senses, our extrasensory
I agree.
ability.
That's
Yeah.
been my experience too, that everybody has the ability. It's just a matter of developing and enhancing it. Yeah. Was your family spiritual? Did you have psychics in your family?
Um, Not that I'm aware of, although I do believe I had my one both my uncles were Um, kind of they were both, space engineers, and one of them in particular would when I look back at some of the things he would say and tell me and do, I think, "You know what? You were in psychic, but he just looked at it as kind of practical knowing or something." I don't even know how he thought of it, but to him, it was never anything that was kind of extraordinary, but he could tell me. I remember getting in the car once with him, And before we backed out of the driveway, he told me exactly what was wrong with my car with the engine. And it was a little minuscule thing. I didn't even know there was anything wrong with the engine. And then he said, "Well, take it to a mechanic. Tell him I told you this needs to be worked on." And I thought, "Yeah, right, right, yeah." And anyway, I ended up doing that, not right away, but a little while later because it did start to run not right. And he was right. And I look back and I think there was a little bit of psychic going on there.
So
Yeah.
when did you realize that not everybody had the abilities that you did? Were you in school? Did you have somebody say, "Oh, honey, that's just your imagination," or did you
Actually, it was young because I remember getting in trouble a lot.
For what? What did you do?
And then I realized, you know what? Maybe that's not so obvious to other people. Maybe with my mother in particular, because I would say things that to me were kind of obvious to my mother, and she did not want some of her things being told. Like, I knew she was pregnant before I told us. She wasn't showing, it wasn't like she looked pregnant, she was very early, and I remember blurting out, "Well, mom, you're pregnant," or something like that, and, yeah, I got in a lot of trouble for that. I'm not sure she wanted everybody to know at that point, but it was things like that it came out mostly with my mother, where I think it was because she was kinda secretive too and held on to things like information and was very private. So I think that, that dynamic there. So consequently, I kind of learned to just not say what I knew, you know, because I didn't want to say things that would offend people, which I think was probably not a bad discipline for me, and to wait for people to ask me. So now that, I went into that, right?
So, what are some of the more commonly misunderstood or incorrect cultural assumptions about people that have extrasensory abilities that we just established? I believe, and I think you do too. All of us have them, but what are the some of the common misconceptions about people that are vocal about it or talk about things that they're perceiving that others are going, "Well, how do you know that?"
Mhm, yeah. I don't know, I think, maybe I've got too much of a positive spin on this at this point, but I remember when I moved to North Carolina, it was in the '80s, I think it was the late '80s, mid to late '80s, and, being clairvoyant was still illegal here.
It was illegal.
It was a it w There was still a law on the books that you could not practice it would named a few things. I remember clairvoyance being one of them. Yeah, believe it or not. It wasn't, as far as I know, I don't think anybody was ever arrested for it, but I do know that it was, the reason I know that is there was a metaphysical bookstore, and they were concerned. It was 2 women from the area, and they were concerned about advertising psychics, that they could get shut down, which they didn't, but that was the concern. So, you would know because 'cause you're in Alabama too, that, um, when the South, I found, because I actually grew up in Massachusetts. So, when up where I was, it was much more open. It wasn't real open, but more that so than down here. But I'm gonna try to, uh, not make this too long to answer your question, but hopefully, I think that's changed some. I think when I look at the progression, I do feel that people in general are more open to it than they used to be. People would come to me at the beginning of when I started, when I years ago, and they would almost sneak in because then, everything was in person, and they would almost sneak in and just be, they didn't want anybody to know. They didn't want anybody to know that they were consulting with me, or, their church. Oh man, if the church knew, that was the end of it. So I don't know. I think there still is a lot of misconceptions, and I think one of the big ones is that we're all alike. You know, that if you consult or see one person that's psychic or a medium, and maybe they're a little bit more into, different things in that realm, and then there's other psychics that connect and communicate information in a very different way or a different level, maybe more practical information. And some people will talk more about like ETs or, things that are out there. So I think there's so much possibilities within the community that I feel like I don't know, at this point, it feels like the word psychic or a medium is almost just too broad, and we need to kind of, like, slim it down a little bit and be more specific.
Hmm. I never thought of it that way. I find it interesting that it's so siloed. You got the mediums and the psychics and the pet psychics and the medical intuitives and the past life people. And it's like you connect with spirit, you do it all. I don't understand why there are the different categories. That's been my experience. I say I'm a buffet of psychicness because once I connect with spirit, I do it all.
I don't know if everybody's like that, though. I do too. I mean, I've done probably it all, everything, but I don't I don't know. I don't know. I've seen more people, kind of just be pet psychics,
Oh,
and
I
that's
know.
it,
Well, it's like
you
the
know?
medical industry. You got the
Yeah, oh, yeah, it's
neurologists and the
right.
proctologists and the, cardiologists and all of that. You say that energy is the substance of our emotions. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think I feel like our emotions are our strongest energy. When I say energy, what I'm talking about is vibration with that, where I feel, and let me break it down even more. Um, it has a very wide range of vibration. I'll give you an example. When we look at the physical vibration, it tends to be there's variations, but it tends to be a dense energy, which is why we're physical. It's because it's so dense that, it's in manifest form. Um, Emotions can be acted on. They can be felt intensely. They can be high, positive, love energy at a very high frequency. It, Emotions can also be very low frequency, as in anger or rage or negativity. And when we stir up our emotions, when we feel strongly about something, that can influence and affect ourselves, others, our environment. It's just powerful energy, our emotions.
I agree. And I find that it's easier to communicate with spirit when we're in a high vibration and we feel good than when we're in a low vibration, like in the situation of grief. And people say, I try and talk to I try and communicate with my loved one and I just can't do it. And I said, well, they just passed. You're in deep grief.
Yeah,
It's
right.
harder for
Yeah.
spirit to communicate on the I feel crappy channels.
Yeah, definitely, because it's
Yeah,
that lower vibration again, and they're in that higher vibration, so there's just too much dissonance there.
right. So, how do you
Yeah.
help your clients and your students get to the
Mhm.
higher vibration?
Oh gosh, where do we begin with that? I think the very beginning of that would be just be understanding it. Just having more of a simple understanding of what that even means. And I think the examples I give clients and people and write about are examples we can all relate to, that talk about how sometimes we can feel when we're feeling light and happy and open, and our heart is open. The difference between that feeling and the feeling of being um, upset about something or in grief or in stress, and how that feels tighter and smaller, and to get more in touch with the kind of somatic feeling of that. How does our body feel with that? I think that gives people something to ground it with. Because if sometimes you say frequency, vibration, and it seems so elusive. Well, what does that mean? But when we can kind of put it in our, three-dimensional, oh, that's what that is. Okay, well, I get that. And then, I go through different things about how to make choices and release some of the heavier, how to let go of some of the habitual emotions, because we sometimes what we'll do is we have go-to emotions, people will have emotions that are easily triggered. They form patterns that without even realizing it, we wake up in the morning and we feel like, "Oh, another day. Okay, what the oh gosh, I don't wanna do that. I don't wanna do this." Or we wake up feeling, "Okay, yeah, great. I'm awake. looking forward to this because I'm gonna be doing this today." So there are choices we can make in a very understandable way how to choose higher vibration. And then we can shift into that awareness of how when we open to that when we kind of train ourselves to shift into those emotions, what we're also able to do is to begin to not just feel the difference in our physical body, but also feel the difference in our ideas, in our intuition, in what the information that comes to us, the ease that that comes to us, and then we shift into a little bit of how those feelings, those high thoughts, that energy makes our life tangibly better, manifests in our life in tangible, positive ways, and understanding kind of the correlation of all that, how that works. So it doesn't seem quite as abstract and elusive.
So it sounds like it really, and I love your example about how you feel when you wake up in the morning. It can be habitual. It can be just like a habit. Like,
Very habitual.
yeah.
Yeah.
How do we break those?
Well, I think a big part of it is becoming conscious that we are in the habit. I had to do that years ago with myself. I do it. I've noticed, I've done that a few times with myself where I realize I'm feeling feelings that aren't, you know, I think sometimes I'll say, why are you even feeling that? Things are good. Why do you feel that way? Anxious or stressed or like, oh, heavy. And I realized that it's just what I'm used to feeling sometimes, and there's no reason for it. There's nothing bad, there's nothing wrong, and then, it's a process too sometimes of letting go of unconscious feelings too. Old patterns within us of emotional stresses or things that we've pushed down deeper into our gut. We've swallowed emotions or difficult times or so sometimes that comes from repressed energy. And sometimes it's just more, I need to make a better choice. I need to choose to be in a better place to see things more positively. And when we start to do that, we can make that the habit. So, it's sometimes it's more work than others if we have to really, you know, be able to look a little deeper within ourselves and give ourselves permission to release old stuff that we've got locked away. But there's also that daily choice too. I feel we need to work on.
I think some of it too is in the DNA, it's ancestral and
Mm,
it's behavioral, it's
absolutely, yeah.
learned. I have friends who their cultures, their grandmothers and their mothers would say, "I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop." Things would be wonderful, and they'd say, "Oh gosh, I'm afraid to just really celebrate this because 'cause I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." And I'm thinking, "What?" And it's just something that they've heard all their lives, and then when I pointed out to them Not that we're doing a session or anything, but just in normal conversation, they'll say, "Well, I never thought about it that way. I've just heard it my whole life." And I say, "Well, think about how twisted that is." That instead of enjoying the moment, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop and you're waiting for something bad to happen, which begs the question that will piggyback off of a comment you made a couple of minutes ago about the frequency that we put out. It helps us manifest what we experience in our lives. Can you say some more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the book, my latest book, is that Raise Your Frequency and Manifest Abundance. And in the book, I talk a lot about how we as intuitives, empathics, and highly sensitive people have the ability. One of the things that beyond knowing, beyond being able to intuit information and guidance and connect with the other side or higher divine beings, we also it struck me, years ago, it struck me that we're limiting our abilities if we only not that focusing on those things is not a bad thing. It's wonderful, all those things. It's absolutely. However, there's also other gifts that go along with that sensitivity that we can also work with and develop more. And one of those gifts is the ability to act, as we all know, sense energy, feel it, and to be able to feel those higher divine frequencies, to feel that kind of love, to feel that kind of guidance, to feel that there is a loving divine presence that is always creating, that is always it can't not be good. It can't not create in goodness because there's no opposite to that. There's no opposite at that high frequency. That is the substance of it all. Now that changes as that frequency changes, but at that level, it is always creating from the substance of divine energy. And when we can kind of understand that higher level of consciousness, now we may not be able to be in it long because, we have a physical body and we're dealing with a lot here, and all. However, even if we just tap into that for a moment, even if we can just feel that and embody that presence for even a second, because in that energy, there's no time and space. There's no well, you only did that a minute, so that's not gonna count. It doesn't matter because it can completely shift things, and that's what miracles are, it can completely shift things outside of the duality of cause and effect. So, at that level, even that little bit of touching in on that energy, if we can embody that and allow that to flow through us the way we do when we connect with loved ones on the other side or information, we let it into our awareness, it comes into our brain basically that interprets it and gives it meaning. Well, we can do that same thing. We can embody that. We can allow that to flow through us, and when we allow that high level of energy to flow through us, then it has to manifest as our highest good. There's no opposition to that.
Mhm. Well, and we need the contrast to create what we want. When we know what we don't want, it helps us create what we want. So, just in that alone, I think piggybacks on what you're talking about, that even when things seemingly are horrific in our lives, it propels us to create something that's more suited to what we want. And is that serving a good purpose? Absolutely, it is. So even if it's that one little nugget in something that's less than optimal, that's the only thing you can latch on to when you're going through something tough. That's worth thinking about. Great way to look at it. Yeah, I love your explanation with that. What's an empath, and are we all empaths?
My simple definition is I let me just say this before I tell you this. I'm not completely comfortable with saying I am empathic or I'm not because I'm not, just because to me, um, I don't know, a lot of people that identify as empaths are people that are highly sensitive to energy, especially emotional energy. They absorb, we absorb emotional energy from others, from the environment. We can even absorb it from the news. And there's a sensitivity to empaths that can make empaths feel more vulnerable at times to what's out there, to kind of what's circulating. And but there's other things that go with being an empath too. There's a tendency for empaths to really want to help others, to really want to be there for others, sometimes at the for their own detriment too. We all know that empaths are known to attract more narcissistic people, as an example. Now sometimes that can be for a lot of reasons, but empaths can also, um, really attract people that are wounded and hurting and need help and need love. So there's an incredible amount of love that empaths feel too. And sometimes, again, that can be beautiful in the way of life affirming and, um, the world can just be this, just place of connection to animals and nature and, children, and that's a wonderful part about empaths, but it also includes sometimes that heart also being connected to things that don't necessarily are in their best interest or in our best interest. Um, my and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book too, is because I really wanted to help people who don't quite understand their gifts and how we can choose the energy that we connect to. It's one of the biggest issues I've had when people identify as empaths is that it's almost this blessing and curse. And it doesn't have to be because it's kind of our responsibility to choose the energy to connect with. It doesn't mean that we're mean people or that we disregard suffering or that we don't want to help others. What that means is that that's not the primary place where our energy where we're absorbing energy. My feeling is our number one connection always needs to be the highest energy that we can attain. And then from there, we allow that energy to flow through us to others, right?
I think of caregivers too as being empaths, especially the frontline caregivers like the nurses and the nurses' aides and the EMTs. And I think a lot of physicians go into the industry because they want to help people. And that's their MO. Healers, caregivers in long-term care and home care people and family members. We all know people who perhaps have an elderly mother or grandmother or grandparents, and there's 18 grandchildren, and everybody knows who the grandchild is that is gonna be the one that's gonna take care of grandma in her home in her golden years. So, would you agree with that?
Oh,
That
absolutely. Yeah,
those that's the
absolutely.
caregiver mentality that, thank God, we need them.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's, again, one of the reasons I wanted to try to work with frequency with empaths more specifically is because, my feeling is that even for nurses or doctors or caregivers of any kind, is that we can only maintain that role as an empath if the primary energy that we're connecting to is higher source energy. Because if we don't, we will burn out, and it will be to our detriment. We can have headaches or we don't sleep or, there's all kinds of things that happen when we deplete our energy in that way. So I feel like when we do that, when people in those positions do that, it's amazing. It's amazing the healing and the gift that is to be seen, in a hospital setting. Or I'll give you an example that just popped into my mind. My mother had cancer, terminal cancer, and this was years ago when there wasn't as much options as we have now, and they kinda told her when she was diagnosed, "Yeah, you're gonna live for a year," basically, is what they told her. And she was a wreck. She was just we all were. She was having a very difficult time with that diagnosis, and it was right after the diagnosis where she didn't want to go to the hospital anymore. She just didn't know what to do. She just didn't wanna do anything, but we had to take her. I forget why, but there was something we had to go to the hospital for. And she was dreading it, and we all were, and she was upset. And we walked in, we sat down in the waiting room, and I hear a voice, "Sherrie, Sherrie, is that you, girl? Is that you? Well, girl, come on o" And I look up, and there was a woman who I had worked with a little. I hadn't worked with her a lot, but she worked in the hospital, and she was an African American woman who was very, very focused in her church and very focused in love and healing and helping people, and one of those personalities that's just big, that just fills the room, and she changed everything. She changed everything. Just her saying that, coming over, "Is that your mama?" She took care of my mother, and she was gonna get her through that whole process, and just told her, "Jesus is with you. Just hold my hand. Jesus is with you." And I think that's a good example of, the kind of what empaths are also beyond that even, but definitely capable of.
Well, and know what to say and what to do, and probably aren't even cognizant that, "Oh, I need to cheer this woman up." I mean, it just flowed through her. So that was spirit flowing through her to help guide her, to help you and your mom and your family. That's a great story. I find that hospice nurses in particular tell me, the ones that I know and the ones that I've interviewed, that they just love what they do, and that they just are so grateful, and that their positions don't turn very often. Other nurse positions in particular, there'll be a kind of a revolving door sometimes of different nurses doing different floors and different departments in the hospitals and all that, but those hospice nurses, they get those positions and they stay there for a really long time and they love it, which to somebody that isn't aware of all the spiritual side of the end of life just sounds twisted, sounds maudlin, and it's not. It's that they're able to witness it and they feel the energy around their patients. And every hospice nurse that I've talked to can see spirits or has encountered colleagues and their patients' family members and the patients themselves who are witnessing those spirits that are there. And university-based research shows that 90% of people see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as they're approaching the end of their lives. That's a big statistic when you go there. And then we go back to, well, we all thought grandma was hallucinating because of the morphine. Grandma wasn't hallucinating. She was actually seeing her mother who'd been dead for 50 years, and her spirit was in the room. Which leads me to the question, you say that we can continue relationships with loved ones who've passed. Talk more about that. How do you know that to be true? And can you give us a couple of examples of what you've heard and or witnessed along those lines?
Well, um, yeah, there's so much yeah. Uh, my feeling is that not only can we feel their presence, a loved one, in term, of and there's so many different ways we can become aware of a loved one's presence, whether it's through signs they send us, and there's so many different signs as most people have experienced some kind of sign from a loved one, whether it's a bird or, yeah, all kinds of things. And then there's also, levels of hearing messages or feeling that they're just having a conversation with a loved one. M my feeling is that when a loved one passes over, when a loved one is in spirit, our connection with them doesn't end, and not just the communication. The communication doesn't end, of course, it shifts, it completely changes, we're not verbally able to communicate unless it's, interverbal, um, but also what changes is actually, it doesn't change. It changes, but it doesn't change. What our connection with them evolves into a higher soul connection with them. And through that connection, we continue to evolve with them, even though sometimes we're not aware of that. And I'm going to try to give you an example to make sense of that because that seems kind of outlandish, maybe. Um, I've had clients who feel very close to a loved one who has passed over. Um, I had a client who's very close to her father, very, very close to him. And he passed over and it was huge for her. It was they just had a very strong, special relationship. And when he passed over, she didn't feel him, which most people don't right away because of the heavy grief. But over time, what she noticed is some of the things that we're gonna have a little visitor here. Um, some of the things that she had, um, that they had talked about places to visit together, vacations to take or things to do or, a specific occupation that she wanted to advance into. And things started to evolve in a way for her. And when doors were opening, she was having opportunities that she didn't have in the past. Things just came easier to her. And then simultaneously, she would feel a sign from her father or something would come in that she'd think about him when something happened. And sure enough, she began to understand that it was her father that was helping her to make some of the changes and to do some of the things that she had so much wanted to do. I'm gonna give you another example. I should have given you this one in the first place. Um, my husband passed over, but my daughter this was actually her stepfather, not her father, but they were very, very close, and he was a musician. He was actually I don't know if you remember Cyndi Lauper back in the
Sure.
'80s.
Yeah,
Well,
sure, sure.
he was her
Oh,
keyboardist
wow.
and did all of the Big Girls Just Wanna Have Fun, all that tour. I mean, he was, like, right in when she was hot, hot. And so she, was a teacher and she started to have all this success with teaching. She actually became the, teacher of the year for North Carolina at some point. Yeah, she still is. She's very incredible teacher, and now she does other work in education, but every time that something she knew something positive was gonna happen because she'd get in her car and she'd hear that song. And this was not that long ago, so it wasn't like that song was popular any longer, you know? But she'd call me and she'd say, "Oh, mom, Kenny's talking to me again. Something's gonna happen. I got in the car and I couldn't believe it, but I heard his song. I heard the song again." And sure enough, and I remember when she got that, the award when she went on the way to getting the award for, Teacher of the Year, which she didn't know she had won at that point. She heard the song in the car, and she didn't know she'd win, but she thought, "Oh, it's something good's gonna happen." So, that's an example of positive ways that they continue to help us to evolve and grow, and it can be as simple even as helping us to forgive somebody too. We can start to see someone in a different way. We can start to, maybe we've always been hurt by someone or they passed over and we never resolved things. It was difficult. We couldn't understand each other and we never got to that place of just accepting one another and forgiveness. And when they pass over, I see this very often with people, is they start to see them a little differently. They start to think, "Well, you know what? I just I know that they had a challenge. This was they had a mother that maybe was hard on them, or they had, um, you know, some illness or something." And they begin to see them and feel them in a different way, and that forgiveness comes. And a lot of times, that's the person on the other side wanting to make peace, wanting to resolve things, wanting to come to a place of forgiveness with one another. And those are those are things that really make a difference in our lives when we're open to listening and to feeling, and not even in particular at um sometimes it comes spontaneously, but when we don't push it away, I should say, when we allow ourselves to listen and to know that, okay, I'm open to that. I'm open to whatever this is coming in.
I find too that people that have a snarky relationship, let's say with a parent, say a mother, just for conversation's sake, where I try and take them is your mom's now pure love. That snarky personality stayed with her body and she wants to help you. So ask her for help. And that's when the relationship really blossoms with the parent in spirit,
Mhm.
which
Yeah,
is really,
absolutely.
really fun to watch too. Changing directions for a minute, you have a psychology degree and a Master of Divinity degree. How do they help you in your work as a psychic medium, medical intuitive, and teacher?
Well, I'm talking a little bit at the beginning about how I started, when I was young, I started doing sessions. It was basically, my 20s because people were asking me to, but then I became more long-term, full-time professionally in my 30s. But before I did that, before I really made that step into wanting to do it as my profession, I really felt like I needed to have more of a foundation. I really needed to, be able to work with people in a way that I felt confident, not just with my ability. It wasn't my ability I was questioning. I was really questioning more how to have good boundaries, how to communicate things to people, how to show love and compassion to others, and how to bring more of that message that I so much believe in about the love and help that we get from higher divine sources into the sessions. I didn't want to make the sessions solely about information. I wanted my sessions to be guided more by a loving divine force that would be really healing and helping others. That was really why I wanted to get into it. And it's one of those things that was meant to be because I was feeling that. But again, we're talking 80s, early 90s in North Carolina. And I had no idea how I was going to at that time, there wasn't a lot on the internet in that way. There was barely the internet at all. And I mean, not like it is now. And I don't, I, I, I think, I'm not remember, I can't remember. I think, okay, it was a small newspaper I found, and it had this little ad about a New Thought Seminary that was going to be doing a class, 2 classes or 2 courses every other weekend for 2 years in North Carolina. It was about an hour and a half, 2 hours from me, but as soon as I saw that, I thought, "Sign me, I'm doing that. I'm doing it. That's exactly what I need." And there were 2 courses they were teaching, both 2 years long. One was, Master's of Divinity in Pastoral Counseling, and the other was a metaphysical degree. So, yeah, that's how it came about, and I'm so happy I did it. I learned so much in the programs.
You were led, darling.
I was definitely led.
You were
Yeah,
led.
yeah.
Yeah, and were there any conflicts in the curriculum versus what you had found to be true in your psychic and medium abilities? Did you find any conflicts? I hear that from people with divinity degrees, and Peggy Huddleston is someone that comes to mind. We've had her on the show, and she has a master's of divinity from Harvard, and I asked her that question too, and she said, "Oh god, it was just like stuff that they were preaching was just opposite of what I had found to be true in being able to communicate with spirit."
Well, that was my mother was actually a Methodist minister and went to Duke. She got a Master's of Divinity at Duke. One of my brothers has a PhD from Duke in religion. I have a very religious family. I did not want to go to a Master's of Divinity at a college that was not going to be more broad. I wanted a program to be more broad-based. I wanted the program to be something that would work with the work I was doing, because I agree, my mother was always open to the work I did. She never she knew what I did. I never hid it from her. I never felt the need to hide it from her, and she was very accepting and took it very matter of fact. To her, it was like, okay." She didn't really feel strongly one way or another. Um, so it wasn't that it was negative for me that, it was more so that it didn't speak to what I was doing, which is why I was so specific when it was the New Thought, because New Thought is not like traditional at all. And so the New Thought program absolutely was aligned with what I was doing. They knew what I was doing. And, that was a part of it wasn't a part of the curriculum, but what was a part of the curriculum was the metaphysics in general, which New Thought metaphysics is very broad and open to all this. So, because I think I had such a strong family that I knew the programs they did, I really made more conscious choice not to go down that route.
You probably could have taught some of the classes, if truth be told, number 1. And number 2, I find it so fascinating too, Sherry, that all of this new thought, I'm using air quotes here for those of you that are listening and not watching. New thought is old thought. It's ancient thought. It's been around since the beginning of time. And as we become more well educated and literate, frankly, and we can say, okay, well, that doesn't really resonate with me, even though it's perhaps dogma of a religion or a culture that's been around for a long time. There's always still the bottom line, which is people have been communicating with spirits since the beginning of time. And it's all throughout all the holy texts and it's in every culture, anywhere in the world. And so I kind of chuckle when I hear the term new thought or it's, the new spirituality. I'm like, no, it's not. It's the ancient spirituality that we're just resurrecting and going back to and exploring. I find that
Yes,
fascinating
definitely. It
too.
really is. It's funny because prostitution and psychics are both like the same. I mean, just in terms of the oldest professions, really.
I never thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Speaking of Duke And Duke's come up several times, and you're in that whole research triangle area up there, UNC, the University of North Carolina, and lots of other schools. You taught spiritual intuitive development classes at Duke. You didn't wanna go there because you didn't wanna be caged in with that certain perspective, but you taught there, and that's not necessarily a place I think of when talking about woo-woo. How did that happen? And tell us about that
Mm.
experience.
Well, the funny thing is too, I lived within walking distance of Duke, both the university and the medical center. I was, like, right for 30 years, I lived like, I could walk there, which was fortunate because this was years ago. Um this was right when, the medical profession was beginning to include more alternative therapies. It was before Duke built their whole big alternative therapies and that program. And one of the founding members that helped build that program was a physician at Duke who started these mind, body, spirit talks. So I started to go to them, and they were very interesting. He'd have talks about all different types of, all that's out there, both medical and he was very open and liked psychics and, mediums and medical intuition. And it was very progressive then. I had one client that saw long term that was a professor at Duke. I had 2 or 3 other clients that also taught at Duke. In fact, well, I take that back. There were 2 long term, 1 man, 1 woman. So what happened is that they invited me to speak in their classes to their students, both of them. Even though what they taught had nothing to do with what I was doing. One was linguistics, the other was actually religion teacher, but he was teaching Eastern religion. Um, so I did both, and every term they'd invite me to go and actually do sessions, read short readings with their, students. So I would do that, and then there was a program that opened up at Duke. I can't remember the name of the program, but it was branching off from the mind, body, spirit weekly seminars they gave, and I was invited to teach in that, and, both students could go, and then they also had a night or an evening course where, people from the community could go, so I did both, and then eventually that transitioned into I can't remember what they called it at the time, but it was their version that became later more of their integrated medicine program, but it was started with a different name, but that became the integrated medicine, which became is now a huge, it's a huge complex now there, but that was at the very beginning of all of that shift that I was lucky enough to be part of that.
I heard Herbert Benson from Harvard speak at Vanderbilt in Nashville about mind, body, spirit. I would say it was the mid-90s, and that it was new at that point. It was impressive that somebody with that kind of academic pedigree behind them was putting all of this together and combining the allopathic and the other he was talking about meditation and the Eastern philosophies and things like that. Furthermore, I have a graduate of my class who's a former C-suite executive for decades from Duke Medical Center,
Oh, really?
and I also have I was just thinking probably upwards of 20 or more professors from all over America, some of the most well-known institutions, and also some from abroad who are in just a whole wide range of specialties that are graduates of my class too. So it's interesting how we think, well, it's just women that are wearing magic turbans and have a crystal ball doing this stuff, but it's way more far-reaching, I think, than any of us know that people are interested.
Did you know I read this study years ago that openness to intuition, psychic abilities, media, medical intuition, all of that correlates with higher educated, intelligent people.
Oh, well, I love that. That's a quotable
Mhm.
moment there.
Yep, and it's true. They that was a surprise too to people. Yep, the higher educated, the higher IQ, the more people are open to these possibilities and find interest in it. So, there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah,
Mhm.
there. I love that. What's your process in connecting with spirit with your mediumship clients? If somebody comes to you and they've lost a loved one, for example, and they say, I want to talk to my deceased, whomever. How can you give us a little bit of an inside peek of what you do and how it works between
Well,
you and your client?
generally, I don't even want to know who people wanna talk to. The least I know, the better off I am, and my clients are fine with that 'cause, it's a funny thing, but, sometimes what that does too is it builds more trust. That it seems like this thing that if people tell me anything, then there's more skepticism there for them. Plus, for me, I prefer to see who comes in, and there will be times when the person that they want to talk to doesn't come in right away, and I have to, ask, "Could you please come in?" And they will, but, I'd like to begin by seeing who comes in, giving the messages that they give without any questions or what people, are most interested in. And the reason I do it that way is to build their trust, but also to establish a pretty strong, firm connection to the spirit, to who I'm talking to and what's happening there. I don't you know how that is, like, sometimes if you know things, then I don't wanna lean into that because it's too confusing. So it's better for me not to know, and then once I go through whatever it is coming in, I will ask them if they have any questions. And, they will if they do, they'll ask me. Sometimes they'll ask for someone else to come in too, and usually when that happens, that person will come in, but, um, I found spirit to be very chatty, very talkative. I mean, so it doesn't like I run out of things to say.
They're funny
Oh, they're
too.
hilarious. They're
Hilarious.
hilarious.
I know.
I almost wrote a book about that. I almost wrote a book about the funny things they say.
I know. Do you think that that's because they're trying to lighten the grief or the whatever that their loved one who's still in human form is feeling? I find that a lot of the times they come right out of the gate and they'll say something just so random and so hilarious that it'll get their loved one laughing, and then it just goes from there.
Sometimes they'll do that. I had a session a while ago where, um again, it was a daughter it was my client was a woman whose father had passed over very close to him, and he came in right away. I didn't know who she wanted, but he came in right away, big smile on his face. I knew it was her father, and this is what he wanted me to say. I'm like, "No, I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna" I kept telling "I'm not gonna say that." And he said, "No, no, tell her, tell her, tell her." I'm like, here she is, like, holding on to every word. "What are you gonna say for my precious father?" What he wanted me to say was, "Oh, I love spaghetti and meatballs." I'm like, "Really? Really? You want me to say you love" He said, "Yeah, I love spaghetti and meatballs." So I think, "Okay, finally," because they won't tell you anything else until you tell them. So I'm like, "Alright, well, your dad wants you to know you love spaghetti." He's eaten all kinds of spaghetti and meatballs. And she bursts out crying and she says, "Oh, I had that last night. I keep feeling like I just want spaghetti and meatballs."
I know. It means stuff to them, and to you and to me, I'm going, "Seriously? You want me to say that?" And then and I find that they sometimes will get bossy too, like, "Tell her about this," or "Tell her about that," or "Use this analogy," or whatever, and I'll say, "Yeah, your dad's being kinda bossy," but in a fun way, and they'll say that too. Are there common questions that your clients wanna know from their loved ones in heaven? And are there common things that the spirits are telling their loved ones who are still here on Earth?
Well, I think probably most mediums, I think I think it matters if they are familiar with mediums or not in the other side. People that are not, that have never done anything like this before and don't even know if it's possible, I found have more of the standard questions, like, are they at peace? Are they with my mother? Are they with their father or whoever it might be? And they kinda keep it very minimal like that, you know? Um, or they might say, "Are they aware of me? Do they know what's happening?" And then there are people that are more familiar with it, that have worked with people, and they'll ask more, pretty detailed questions, Um, or want I don't know, their interaction is just different. I don't know, you probably have the same experience, but I found people on the other side I agree with you. They wanna lighten things up a lot, and, my experience is they will address things that are going on in that person's life and let them know that they're specific things, they're with them, they're watching over them, or sometimes it just it depends on the spirit too. Sometimes they can be a little bossy and they kind of want their loved ones to, I don't know, maybe see it their way or to see it differently, and sometimes I found they're very, um, supportive of whatever choice they make or, it's different depending on the spirit, but I do think that the other side tends to be more specific about things than we expect them to be.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
had a gal last week, Sherry, who her we were talking with her dad's spirit, and he had died within the past 6 months, let's say, and he was adamant about that she needed to take her car in, and he said, "Your thermostat is messed up, and you need to go take that car, and you don't need to mess around with this." She started laughing, she said, "He's absolutely right. My thermostat, I got the hot button that's on in my car," and then she went on to tell me that he was a former race car driver, and he used to take care of her car and all the family members' cars, and she said, "Of course, that's the first thing he's telling me because that's what he did that's what he would have said when he was alive." So, I find it fascinating how they're gonna validate it's really them with whom we're conversing, number 1, and number 2, they are gonna give advice that in most instances makes sense to the person with whom we're working. Now let's switch to the medical intuitive clients. Can you give us an example of how you do that and what would a normal, if there is such a thing, what would a session look like with you if somebody came to you with a medical thing going on?
Mhm. Well, I always do, especially medical intuition, I do a certain way because I've just found that it makes it easier, just to be more in depth. I always begin at the top of the head. I always do a scan starting a little bit of the head in those higher chakras and then move down the body slowly. Sometimes I'm drawn very quickly to a spot in their body. Sometimes it is a slower progression. And, again, it varies on the person I'm working with, but I always give physical descriptions and, explanations of what I encounter, talking about, minor things, we'll say, as I scan, which could be minor as in, maybe, too much tension in the shoulder area or a specific shoulder is inflamed or, simple little things. And then as we go down now, of course, as the body, we go into the heart and the endocrine system and all the different parts of the body. It gets more detailed. However, I found that by the time I get into the body deeper, I usually am drawn more to a specific area, where there is more of a problem or an issue. And then I realize that's what's going on with them that I need to focus on. And I need to kind of stay in that energy for a while to see the information I get there more specifically. The funny thing for me with medical intuition, I think it's because I was around Duke. and people that, you know, physicians and um, other people in healthcare, and I never ever felt confident. I never wanted to do medical intuition because I have no background in medicine at all. I have no background in anatomy. I did not feel confident doing it. And yet the funny thing is I had a physicians from Duke would come see me and ask me to do medical intuition. I was so intimidated when I started, and I think that played in my favor because I completely let it go and handed everything I received over to spirit. Like, I don't know. I have no clue about any of this. And it worked out really well in that way. That surprised me. I would get things and just wonder how I have no idea how sometimes that always happens communication with the other side or just informational sessions, but I don't know, for me, I had put medical as kind of a hands off, that was a little bit more, that was something it wasn't, it wasn't a real choice for me to do. It was really people coming to me and asking me that brought me into it.
You were led again.
Yeah.
Same thing, back to that being led thing. And I'm fascinated with all of the medical providers that take my classes. Physicians, surgeons who are physicians, obviously, but all areas of medical providers. And then they use these abilities that you and I have developed to help their patients and help them heal, help diagnose, help them heal. And I'm seeing the zeitgeist shift. Are you starting to see that as well on
Mhm.
some
Oh,
levels
absolutely, yeah.
where there's more of that? Because people are saying, well, I've been to see 5 doctors, I've gotten 5 different diagnoses, 5 different treatment suggestions, and I still have the same symptoms. So I'm gonna try this other thing just for kicks and see what happens. And oftentimes we can identify things that others can't. And I believe that the work that you do and the work that I do is part of the healing equation. You got Eastern medicine, Western medicine, energy medicine, all the other complementary medicines, and it's all intended to help the person heal. Couple of questions as we're winding down, couple of last questions. I can't let you go without talking about your work as a psychic detective. So that's why I saved that for last. Tell us about that.
I'm writing a memoir right now about the biggest case I worked on, which was a cold case murder, rape and murder, in Raleigh, North Carolina in the early 2 it was a cold case, so it hadn't been solved in a few years, and it was a big case. It was a real big one um and a detective actually contacted me. He said he got my somebody had called the tip line and told them, "Oh, you gotta talk to her." So, I surprisingly, he called me, which shocked me, and I worked with him for about 3 weeks to yeah, about 3 weeks, about a month, somewhere around there. We worked together, and I ended up going to the apartment complex where she lived, uh, and met him because a lot of the work we did was I would just tune into it and then tell him what I was receiving. Um, but when we went there to the apartment complex, it was kind of one of those amazing things where it all fell into place, and I identified a man who the way I described him, there had been someone on their list that matched that description. Very I mean, it was a very distinctive description of him because there were qualities he had that was a little his hair and things like that. His he was very tall. There was just it was pretty much it was very much, succinct with that, and there were some other things where he lived and the car he drove, just things that all fit into place, you know? So, based on what I told him, um, they went to this man's place of employment and talked to the boss or whatever and got a straw or something to get DNA off of, and the DNA matched the killer's DNA, so they arrested him, within I think we stopped working together, and I think within 2 or 3 weeks, he was arrested. That was the biggest case I worked on, and I I it was a really, really tough case for me. I don't know if I would do that again. I probably would if someone asked me, because I did after that, I had so many requests for, um, detective work, but it was hard because his energy was honestly, I didn't truly believe in evil till I worked with him. It was truly that dark, and he was also planning other murders. They found, and I told the detective that, and they found that when they went through his house, they found notes and names and plans. He was very, very smart, and he was very, organized, which is why he never got caught, because he organized and he thought out everything, every little movement, and he had killed before, so he was a serial killer. He had killed several times before, but working with that energy, that darkness, and that it was hard to do that for me, and like I said, I kinda shied away from it. I still did missing persons after that, but that was a very big event in my life going through that.
I bet.
Yeah.
Goodness. All right, last question. Why do we incarnate?
You thought you'd end on an easy one, huh? It's a funny thing, the more I know, the more I learn, the more I know I don't know. I mean, I know, but I don't know, Like, there's so many reasons we incarnate. There's so many reasons. We can incarnate. I don't even know where to begin in that. Sometimes we incarnate to help others, to be there for other people, to be supportive. Sometimes we incarnate because we need to and want to evolve, because we can evolve more rapidly here. Sometimes I think we incarnate because we almost get pulled back here too. We haven't resolved things. There's still this heaviness in our vibration that's pulling us back here to kind of, work on some other issues and learn how to forgive, learn how to be compassionate, to open our hearts. So I think it's really kind of an individual, why do we incarnate?
Great answer.
Probably more than one reason why, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Multitude of reasons. Wow. You are extraordinary, my girl. Holy
You are
Moses.
extraordinary.
Wow. You are obviously brilliant, wise, eloquent, and your whole vibe, your whole demeanor, the whole time I've been talking with you feels like a warm hug. I feel
Oh,
like
that's so sweet.
Olaf from Frozen, the Frozen movies, the animated movies where Olaf says, "I just need a warm hug." I understand why your clients flock to you because just talking to you is just so soothing and comforting and holy Moses. Wow.
Well,
You are
thank you. You
extraordinary.
made my day. Wow. My
Oh,
week.
goodness.
That's so
Well
sweet.
I mean
And
every
here
word.
here we both are in the South, no less,
I
too.
know. Yeah. Yeah. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Probably my website, sherriedillard.com, and it's SherriedDillard.
We will put that in the show notes. Everybody, you're gonna get lots of golden nuggets out of this one. So you're gonna wanna listen to it and take notes. I know people will. In the meantime, sending you lots of love from Sweet Home Alabama, mwah! And from North Carolina too, where Sherrie is. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.